Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a massive, incredibly common cognitive trap, one that trips up, well, pretty much all of us at some point. We're talking about that huge gap between merely reading something and actually truly learning it. The source material lays out what it calls the mastery staircase, and honestly, climbing it might completely shatter how you think about absorbing information.
Have you ever felt like you completely understood a textbook, only to completely bomb the actual test? I mean, think back to prepping for an exam or a huge presentation at work. You read the material, you're nodding along, it makes perfect sense in your head. You feel like an absolute genius, right? But then, the moment of truth hits. You sit down for the test or stand up to speak, and your mind just goes completely blank. Why does that happen?
Section 1. The illusion of competence, or the trap of feeling it.
Section 2. The Feynman explanation test. Criteria 1.
Okay, let's dive right into this. The source material points out a really uncomfortable truth. Judging whether you truly know something has absolutely nothing to do with feeling like you know it. That feeling, it's often a total illusion. True mastery isn't about that false confidence. It's entirely based on whether or not you can actually use it. So how do we test for true mastery? Well, we take the first step up our staircase, which targets our favorite hiding place, jargon. The first test of mastery is the Feynman learning technique. Basically, can you explain the concept clearly, in your very own words, to someone else? Imagine trying to teach this to a complete beginner, someone who knows absolutely nothing about the topic. If you find yourself desperately clinging to the exact phrasing from the textbook, or relying on heavy industry buzzwords just because you can't find simpler words, you haven't mastered it. The source clearly states that using simple language, without leaning on the original text, is the absolute core of true understanding. Next time you learn something new, try explaining it to a 10-year-old. If they get confused, well, your understanding is the thing that needs work.
Section 3. Adapting to new problems. Criteria 2 and 3.
So it's one thing to talk about a concept, but can your brain adapt when the environment changes? This brilliantly illustrates the stark difference between being merely familiar with the topic and actually mastering it. Look at the left side here, the familiar textbook example. If you can only solve the exact problems presented in the book, or do the exact task you were trained on, you're just showing mechanical proficiency. You're basically running a script. But true mastery, as the source notes, is what happens on the right. What happens when you encounter a new, slightly mutated problem, a scenario that looks a little different from the textbook? If you possess true mastery, you can flexibly apply what you know to navigate that unexpected curveball.
Because a truly mastered concept doesn't just live inside your head in isolation. It's not some standalone file in a folder. To pass this third criteria of mastery, you need to be able to draw inferences from the core idea and establish broader connections. Can you link this new piece of knowledge to other principles you already know? Do you know exactly how it operates across entirely different scenarios? Like, if you learn a specific math formula, for example, do you understand how it might relate to a principle in physics or even economics? True mastery is about building a web of connections, not just hoarding isolated little facts. Section 4. Surviving time and errors. Criteria 4 and 5.
Now we enter the proving grounds. We need to examine if your newly acquired knowledge is fragile or if it can survive both human error and the relentless passage of time. Think about a beginner following a recipe. If there's a typo that says to add a cup of salt instead of a teaspoon, the beginner is going to mechanically follow that instruction and completely ruin the meal. But a master chef? No way. They'll spot the error immediately. The source highlights that a true expert easily spots and corrects mistakes, whether they're their own or someone else's. They don't blindly follow instructions. They understand the terrain so well, they know exactly when the map is wrong.
Which brings us to criteria 5, the famously painful forgetting curve. We've all been there on day one, feeling like absolute geniuses ready to conquer the world, but the source brutally reminds us that feeling like you know something immediately after reading it is about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. Fast forward a few days or weeks, can you still retrieve that information from your long-term memory? More importantly, can you still use it? Real internalization only happens if, 30 days later, you aren't just vaguely recalling the topic, but actually deploying it successfully. If it completely evaporates in a week, well, it was merely an illusion of competence.
Section 5. The real-world test. Criteria 6.
Finally, we reach the summit of our staircase. This is the ultimate proof of mastery, taking the knowledge completely out of the classroom and applying it directly to reality. Because theory is fantastic, but reality is messy. The source is very direct here. If you cannot stably apply the concept in practical, real-world tasks, you simply haven't mastered it yet.
Look, it literally doesn't matter if you memorize the entire dictionary of a foreign language. If you freeze up during an actual conversation on the street, you haven't mastered it. The exact same goes for writing code that actually runs without crashing, using math to balance a complex real-world budget, or deploying everyday work skills under pressure. True mastery provides stable, reliable output when the stakes are real.
Section 6. The Mastery Equation. The Ultimate Proof.
We've climbed the staircase, we stripped away the jargon, adapted to mutated problems, and survived the test of time. Now let's move to and see how this builds, looking at how the source material perfectly summarizes this entire cognitive journey. Step 1 is simply understood. You read it and it made sense. Step 2 is can do, meaning you can replicate that familiar textbook example. Step 3 is can use. You can actually apply it to a new situation or a real-world task. And finally, step 4 is truly mastered. This is where it's deeply ingrained, durable over time, and flexibly connected to everything else you know. The huge problem here? Most people stop at step 1 and trick themselves into believing they're at step 4.
Which leaves us with this powerful, punchy equation straight from the source. Understood does not equal can do, which does not equal can use, which does not equal truly mastered. They are fundamentally different stages of learning. So I challenge you to be brutally honest with yourself. Next time you close a book, are you just coasting on the comfortable feeling of understanding, or have you actually done the hard work to truly master it? Pull out this equation, it might just change how you see your own brain. Thanks for joining this explainer, and keep climbing that staircase.